Rafael Casanova was a Spanish jurist, and supporter of Charles VI, Holy Roman Emperor, as a claimant to the crown of Spain during the War of the Spanish Succession. He became mayor of Barcelona and commander-in-chief of Catalonia during the Siege of Barcelona until he was wounded in combat while commanding La Coronela during the counterattack on the St. Peter front on the last day of the siege, September 11, 1714. He recovered from his wounds, and after the war he continued his fight against absolutism as a lawyer. It has been claimed that he is the author of the book Record de la Lianca fet el Sereníssim Jordi Augusto Rey de la Gran Bretanya, in which Catalonia reminds England of the Treaty of Genoa and their obligation to Catalonia. Rafael was born in Mia around 1660 and lived there until he turned 14 years old. His birth home now houses two museums, one which is dedicated to Rafael himself and the other being the Archaeology and Paleontology Museum, Caves of the Toll of Mia. He was one of 11 children of Rafael Casanova Isola, a landowner of a rural estate in Mia, and Maria Comes Isors, from Liquidament. At the time of his birth, the Casanova family enjoyed solid financial position based on the usage of the land and the trade of grain and wool to supply the powerful textile industry in the subvague area of Moyennes. The Casanovas had a long tradition of participating in public affairs. His father was the head of a Catalan paramilitary organization called Sometent in 1650, councillor of the people and the head of the Moyennes subvague area. The inheritance of the family lands was reserved to his brother, Francisco Casanova, as was the lineage itself. Thus, the young Rafael moved to Barcelona to study law in 1678. At the age of 18 he had achieved a Doctor of Law degree. His father had died in 1682 and his mother 2 years later, in 1684. 3 years after that, in 1687, his older brother Francis was named as an honorable citizen of Barcelona, as Mia had the dignity to be the street and arm of Barcelona. That is, the people of Mia enjoyed the same exemptions, rights and privileges as the people of Barcelona, and were under the jurisdiction of the councillors of Barcelona. In 1696, with his career established, he married the heiress Maria Bosch I Barber, daughter of Pau Bosch and Maria Barber. The Bosch family were a lineage of apothecaries from Barcelona that had important properties in Sant Boi de Llobregat. Maria Bosch had become the widow of a medical doctor, Josep Campionchi Puig, with whom she had a son named Josep. In the marriage agreement, it stated that Rafael Casanova would not obtain possession of the assets of the Bosch family, but would only temporarily administrate them while their children remained underage. This way, Rafael Casanova, the young man who came from Mia, economically consolidated his ascending position in Barcelona, while the Bosch family got a son-in-law to manage their assets. Pau Bosch set a £2,750 dowry for his daughter, adding £2,500 for children born from the marriage, an amount which the Campionch family possessed and had to return, but failed to do so in full, returning only £759. The newlywed couple went to live in an apartment rented by Rafael, on the street of Banes, now 16. This house was discovered by the historian Albert Garcia Espuch, where a newly constructed building stands. In 2014, during the events of the tricentenary of 1714, Barcelona erected a commemorative plaque. They had 4 children: Francesc, Rafael Casanova I Bosch, Pau Teresa. In 1697, Maria Bosch gave Raphael, her husband, new powers to manage the assets of the Bosch family, which were augmented in 1700 by Pau Bosch, her father. On December 29, 1704, Maria Bosch died during childbirth. The newborn twins, Pau and Teresa, died a few days later. The Spanish succession. Months later, in November 1700, Charles II died, the last Habsburg Spanish monarch. The Duke of Anjou, a member of the Bourbon dynasty, was appointed as his successor, and who was enthroned by the name of Philip V of Spain. In 1702, the War of Spanish Succession started when the House of Austria, at odds with the will, invaded the Spanish territories in Italy. In 1703, maritime powers, England and Holland, joined the House of Austria and declared war against the two crowns, Bourbon France and Spain. In Vienna, the young Archduke Charles of Austria was called for as an alternative candidate to rule Spain. In 1704, Charles moved to Portugal, where he sought to recover from the Spanish throne for the Habsburg dynasty. On the other side of the peninsula, Allies launched an attempted landing in Barcelona with the complicity of a small number of Austrian locals. The plot was discovered and the Allied landings failed. The exiled Austrian Viceroy of Catalonia, Francisco Velasco, was shocked and, wanting to avoid any further Austrian conspiracies, Francisco began an indiscriminate repression in Barcelona and repeatedly violated the Constitution of Catalonia. This was a policy that unleashed hatred against his sovereign, Philip V of Spain. Barcelona was governed by its own citizens, who chose 6 judges as directors of Barcelona. These 6 judges were renewed annually during the feast of St. Andrew, November 30th. The election process consisted of judges being chosen by lot, and by balloting system consisting of a bag in which were placed the names of candidates written on paper. For this bag a child drew the citizens elected to govern the city. The nominee could resign if his judiciary experience was not considered suitable. Once appointed, they were advised and supervised by the consul de Cent, the General Assembly of Citizens. The ministries were assigned based on social classes, with the result that the chief minister candidates in the bag only contained corresponding names of those who had the title of honored citizen, a distinction given to only those locals that were significantly distinguished public service in Barcelona. The 6th chief minister appointment was reserved for merchants, and the 6th artisans and farmers. This policy worked effectively so lesser-known citizens like the tailor Bartomeu Oliver, the sailor Mercia Ros, or the barber Pere Torna governed Barcelona, as well as more renowned citizens such as nobleman Ramon de Codina o Antoni de Valencia, the lawyer Gabriel Boria, the doctor Francesc Correrols, and the merchant Jeronimus Caro. There was a sense of gratitude in governing their own city, and the position was not taken lightly. Once the annual term ended, the judge would return to the ranks of citizenry, resuming the exercise of the professions. The repressive policy of the Viceroy Velasco began raising protests which raged from 1703 to 1704. Advisers who disagreed with his methods and his violation of the laws feared that the new Bourbon king of Spain would try to impose the same absolutist politics that his grandfather Louis XIV had applied in France. War of the Spanish Succession. After years of the viceroy's outrages, the Barcelona board resolved to send Pau Ignasi Delmesas to the court of Madrid in order to protest to Philip V himself about the violations of the Catalan laws that were committed appointed by his viceroy. However, reaching the court the emissary, he was arrested and jailed, which again violated the Catalan constitution. 3 months later, during the Feast of the Holy Cross of Christ, the 3rd of May 1705, a military uprising broke out in Vic Habsburg. Alongside the exiled Austrian leaders, Catalonia signed the Pact of Genoa. A treaty established a military alliance between England and Catalonia. Catalonia pledged to fight for the cause of the claimant to the Spanish throne, Charles of Austria, with military aid from England, who in exchange pledged to defend the constitution of Catalonia whatever the outcome of the war. Allied troops landed, turning back to Barcelona and then surrounding the city in October 1705. Viceroy Velasco, and a Bourbon garrison that was in Barcelona capitulated. The councillors of the government of Catalonia and Barcelona received Charles of Austria, hailing him as a liberator. Within days, Archduke Charles swore allegiance to the Constitution of Catalonia. Siege of Barcelona. In November 1705, new citizens were chosen to act as advisors, one of whom, Jacint Ureda, died on January 18, 1706. There was a new drawing on January 25 to appoint his replacement. Luckily, it was ruled that the lawyer Rafael Casanova, who was then a widower and was about 46 years old, should take his place. In the afternoon of the day, 2 emissaries of the city announced his appointment. 2 days later, having closed its professional affairs, the city council sent Baltasar de Luna and Antonio Valencia to take the oath. On January 28, Dr. Rafael Casanova went to the city hall, where he was received by the clerk and other officials of the 100. Further, they accompanied him to the chapel where he prayed, then entered the hall where he was received by all other directors and entered the chapel where they heard Mass. Finally, they returned to the room where the council oath as Chief Casanova III in Barcelona. Meanwhile, Philip V was preparing an offensive to retake the city. The ministers of Charles of Austria were in favor of leaving Barcelona to avoid being captured should the city surrender, but Barcelona's councillors pressured them to stay. On the 30th of March 1706, the minister Rafael Casanova addressed Charles of Austria on behalf of the city, offering the sacrifice of the lives of the locals in their defense. And finally, on April 2, the king issued a statement agreeing to stay in Barcelona to resist the attack. The next day, the troops of Philip V surrounded the city, starting Bourbon siege. On April 15, they began bombing the inner city with firebombs and then undertaking operations aimed at the conquest of the fortress of Montjuïc, from which, once taken, they could force the surrender of the capital. On April 21, the troops of Philip V had taken positions near the fort and began to harass her. Then the rumor spread among the locals that the British troops had agreed to surrender Montjuïc. The rumor caused the outbreak of a general mutiny, and a group of extremists began to touch the alarm bells, summoning the locals' fight to prevent the surrender. The minister-in-chief Francis tried to stop the alarm but fell during the riots and was killed. With the city under fire and making chaos of the municipal government, the second minister Francesc Gallet, the lawyer, and the third chief counsel Rafael Casanova gave directives to restore order and the government of the city, while reinforcing the defences of Montjuïc. However, nothing seemed to stop the progress the Bourbon troops were making, and fear rose of the imminent collapse of Montjuïc and Barcelona. However, on May 8, the English fleet commanded by Admiral John Lequesne glimpsed on the horizon. The sight of the fleet caused the Bourbon troops to break ranks and retreat hastily, abandoning the wounded, the supplies and artillery. Barcelona Barcelona had been released from the siege, and the Bourbon troops who failed to secure the supply lines in their advance had to flee to France. Months later, inquiries were made about what happened during the assault on Montjuic. The second minister Francesc Gallet, who before the war had shown sympathy Philip, was removed from the lists of candidates for public office, and then banished from the city. Conversely, February 6, 1707, Charles of Austria was rewarded the third minister Rafael Casanova with the title Honored Citizen of Barcelona, and he was honored for his performance at the head of the city government during the siege. After siege, with his new position as the honored citizen, Rafael Casanova reached the political pinnacle of Barcelona. For that year he attended all meetings at the 100, and his name became part of the exclusive list of people who could be drawn to become chief minister of Barcelona, which took place in 1713. Also in 1708, in recognition of his prestige and reputation, Rafael Casanova was one of the designated representatives, with Manuel de Ferrarisitches and Cristoforo I Carreras, from Barcelona, that Queen Elizabeth received during the wedding ceremony with King Charles of Austria. Late in 1708 his in-law Paul Bosch died, having all predeceased her children and leaving three her children, Francisco Casanova and Bosch, and Rafael Casanova Bosch, and Josep Campionch Garza, son of the first marriage, his dead daughter, leave it as universal heir heritage Francisco Casanova Bosch, leaving as the second heir to his younger brother Rafael if the first died childless, and finally determined that the legacy by his grandson Joseph Garza was Campionch 3,000 Barcelona pounds. In the year 1709, Campionch demanded full payment of £3,000, while Casanova defended the patrimony of his children, recalling that Campionch had received £2,750 and £2,500 of dowry increase, which had only £750 back, when the second marriage of his mother Mary Bosch, and £3,000 of legacy claiming Campionch were settled. The disagreement would lead to a lengthy legal dispute that lasted until 1744. After the Siege of Barcelona 1706, Austrian troops advanced without opposition to conquer Madrid, but withdrew soon after when the troops of Philip V, reinforced in France, crossed the border. They continue advancing until the Battle of Almansa. After a failed peace treaty in 1709, Austrian troops launched a new offensive which culminated in 1710 with the capture of Madrid again, forced to leave the city before the arrival of French reinforcements. In 1711, in September 1711 that year, Archduke Charles left the peninsula heading to Vienna to take the Holy Roman Empire. In 1712, Rafael Casanova and Manuel de Ferrarisitches attended a conference where they negotiated political situation in Catalonia. The year 1713 began formally in the Dutch city of Utrecht peace talks between major powers. Initially, the ambassadors of Emperor Charles VI insisted that the Principality of Catalonia be elevated to the status of an independent republic. However, after Philip V renounced the throne of France, the Gibraltarian Minorca and commercial advantages granted to the Indians, the English yielded to Philip V on May 14, 1713, to recognize him as legitimate King of Spain, although the deal remained secret until 13 July 1713. For his part, Philip V pledged in Article 13 of the Treaty of Utrecht to grant the Catalans amnesty, but only the same rights and privileges that the inhabitants of the Kingdom of Castile. The article was supposed to effect a repeal of the Constitution of Catalonia, as he had done previously with Aragon and Valencia, and devoting the abolition of laws, rights and government of all states the Crown of Aragon, which thereafter would come under laws and government of the Council of Castile. British ships began shortly after the evacuation of the last remaining Allied troops in Catalonia, enabling the rapid advancement of the Bourbons toward Catalonia in Barcelona. The Peace of Utrecht and the case of the Catalans. In April 1714, the House of Lords devoted several of the plenary sessions to what came to be known as the case of the Catalans. The topic was the Treaty of Genoa, signed in 1705 between the Catalan delegates and the plenipotentiary agent of Queen Anne of England. In the treaty, Catalonia agreed to engage into the war, helping England, with a special emphasis on England ensuring the defense of the Catalan constitutional system, whatever the outcome of the war. But in the Peace of Utrecht the Catalans were betrayed by the English ministers in the peace negotiations, against all expectations, and faced with a vastly superior army, the Catalan institutions decided to stand against King Philip, and defend the constitutional system and freedoms at the highest price. It is not for the interest of England to preserve the Catalan liberties. Catalonia declares the war. The Siege of Barcelona. After the Peace of Utrecht he participated in the parliament in which Catalonia proclaimed the continuation of the war in defense of their constitutions on 6 July 1713. While Barcelona was besieged by Bourbon troops, he was proclaimed consular en cap of Barcelona on November 30, 1713, and by virtue of the functions he was also colonel of the regiment of the militia citizen, governor of Barcelona and the fortress of Montjuïc, as well as member of the 24 Trainer Board of Government. On February 26, 1714, Rafael Casanova became the highest military and political authority in Catalonia, when the Generalitat of Catalonia gave him all the military powers and also was named president of the 9th Board of War. It ruled the city until he was wounded in combat when commanding a counterattack of the Barcelona militia at the St. Peter front on the last day of siege, September 11, 1714. Having capitulated the city, the institutions of self-government of Catalonia were abolished and Rafael Casanova was cleared of its political and military positions. After the defeat their assets were seized, being amnestied years later to return to practice as a lawyer in Barcelona until shortly before his death. He maintained contact with several that had been leaders of the city during the siege, as well as with the exiles in the Austrian Empire, and is credited with the authorship of a public manifesto addressed to King George II of Great Britain remembering the alliance between Catalonia and England, which was published on 1736, the 22nd year of our slavery. Rafael Casanova died on 1743, and 2 years after, the English historian Tyndall wrote in 1745, the Catalans, thus abandoned and given up to their enemies, contrary to faith and honor, were not however wanting to their own defense, but appealing to heaven, and hanging up at the high altar the Queen's solemn declaration to protect them, underwent the utmost miseries of a siege, during which multitudes perished by famine and the sword, many were afterward executed, and many persons of figure were dispersed about the Spanish dominions in dungeons. Homage to Rafael Casanova. His figure has become an icon of Catalanism, regarding him as one of the great patriots. 150 years after the end of the war, the city of Barcelona dedicated a street to Rafael Casanova. In 1888 again the municipal consistory honored his memory by erecting a statue in his honor as the last consular in Cap. shot in this city brandishing the flag of Santa Eulalia in defense of the Catalan institutions. For that year the monument to Rafael Casanova became a place to call for the return of Catalan freedom and institutions of self-governance, especially when these were abolished during the dictatorship of the General Miguel Primo de Rivera, who also prohibited paying tribute to Rafael Casanova, and again abolished during the dictatorship of the General Francisco Franco, when the statue was also withdrawn. Since the restitution in 1977 of the monument in honor of Rafael Casanova, it was placed near where he fell wounded in battle fighting against the absolutist troops. One of the traditional acts of the National Day of Catalonia is that carried out by the Catalan institutions, most of the Catalan political forces, and representatives of major cultural, social and sports associations from Catalonia like FC Barcelona, who present wreaths and floral decorations at the foot of the monument. It is also remembered what was said in 1715 in House of Lords, and the honour of the British nation, always renowned for the love of liberty, and for giving protection to the assertors of it, was most basely prostituted on a free and generous people. The faithful and useful allies of this kingdom were betrayed, in the most unparalleled manner, into irrevocable slavery. Bibliography. VV. A. Catalonia durante la Guerra de Succession. Barcelona. Ara Libes. Baker, J. Deplorable History of the Catalans. For the first engaging in the war, to the time of the reduction, with the motives, declarations, and engagements on which they first took arms. The Letters, Treatise. London, 1714. Baker, J. The Case of the Catalans Considered. London, 1714. Manonellesm. The House of Lords on the Case of the Catalans. Sereníssim. C. Rafael Casanova I comes, Consular en Cap. San Bordillo de Llobregat. Ato. De San Bordillo de Llobregat.